Hi, I'm Alice the Fabric Ninja. And about 5 minutes after you start sewing, you're going to have to start unsewing. These are seam rippers. They're your best friends. It doesn't have to be a hard thing. But as you see, they all kind of look different. And what on earth is that red ball for? I'm going to teach you. I'm going to show you 3 different methods to do seam ripping, and I'll even help you pick out the best seam ripper for you. After all, I'm here to teach you to sew like a ninja. Let's start with my battery of seam rippers. So there's a lot of seam rippers out there. All of these are currently in their closed configuration, which means this one actually can't be closed. Let's go through it one by one. This is a plain old seam ripper. This is as standard as it gets. They look like this if you get them, the Dritz brand of them, and they're not very expensive. But you can actually get them even cheaper. I buy them in packages of 30 actually. I know that seems a bit excessive, but I do sew a lot. And a package of 30 is somewhere around $13. One of these can cost you about $4. Also, a seam ripper is not very good unless it's sharp. And these can get dull pretty quickly. So when they get dull, it's time to move on to a new one. Let's inspect this one. So it has this little short handle here and this big clear cap. So this cap comes off and becomes more handle. So when you're done using the seam ripper, you take the clear cap off and put it back on. The problem is once you get really using the seam ripper and you're pushing, this cap gets stuck on there and becomes nearly impossible to get off. So let's look at the basics of a seam ripper here. So let's think about this like your hand here. So we have a pointy bit. This pokes through the stitches. Then it goes down here. The part in between your hand, this is sharp. So the crook here is sharp. And then the thumb is where the ball is. Now the ball is actually super useful. We'll talk about that more in a minute. Let's move along to the next seam ripper. This seam ripper folds. I love this type of seam ripper. I really love it. You always have a lid. It's very easy for me to keep in my purse for any seam ripping emergencies or for loose threads. And I like how sharp they have stayed. They stayed sharp for a really long time for me. They have the ball on here, very important, sharp in the center, and a long point. It is super quick to put away, and you can just kind of do it in the palm of your hand. So if you are sewing or seam ripping around a toddler, and you know they start coming up to you, you can quickly close this so there's no chance of them running at you and getting stabbed. That's never happened before. So if you look at these two together, they're kind of a similar size. I really like this size. But when I was trying to get ready for my kids, meaning I was very pregnant, I was doing a lot of sewing, and I had some awful pregnancy-induced carpal tunnel. And these did not work anymore. My hands just couldn't grasp that small size, and so I got a bigger one. This is an ergonomic seam ripper. So the handle is bigger. It's a little bit cushy. It's still pretty hard. And it does fit in your hand nicer. It kind of goes in here. If you're doing a lot of seam ripping or you have a hard time grasping small things, this is a great option. This specific seam ripper did not come with a cap, although I have certainly seen ones that do come with one. I will also say it's not really sharp. I'm not actually hurting myself at all here. So I don't remember it ever being terribly sharp at the point, but it is still sharp down here, which is the important part. And another large size seam ripper is this. It's called a Seam Fix, and it has another wonderful feature. Besides just having a large body to it, it also has these two ends. These two ends are made of basically eraser material. They have one on the end here and one on the top, and the lid comes off. So it's a nice big size if you have a hard time grasping small objects. It has the ball, sharp edge, a nice point that's actually a little sharp. And you use these pieces to get rid of all those small bits of thread. You rake it along and it picks up those bits of thread. And it has one on the point here, which is it's a nice little nub where you can kind of get into places. One problem though, this doesn't fit on here. So the moment you take your cap off, it rolls away from you. And then your children can run away with it. Now it's nice that they have one attached, so you always have one even if you lose this end, but it is kind of a design flaw. However, if you love this idea, you can get the mini version of this, and the cap actually fits on the end of the mini version. Now that we know about the tools, let's figure out how to use them. I am going to use my trusty blue seam ripper here because I know it's sharp. And being sharp is one of the most important things in a seam ripper. If your seam ripper is dull, you are working too hard. And if you're working hard at cutting through your stitches, you are way more likely to put a hole in your fabric. So here I have created some seams. I have 4 identical seams here. They have pink on one side and black on the other. I will be the first to admit this is not the most perfectly balanced stitch. You can see a few black dots showing up on this side. So if my stitch was perfectly balanced, you would not be able to see black on this side or pink on this side. But they will certainly do for seam ripping examples. So let's pick our first one. I'm going to show you a couple of different techniques. If you are taking out an entire seam, it's likely that you did a back stitch on one side or the other or both. This seam only has a back stitch here. So that's the first thing we need to do. When you've backstitched, you've gone over the same place a couple of times, and that really the best way to get out the stitches in a backstitch are to slide your long prong under there and cut the threads. There's a lot of threads and a lot of stitches here, so I really recommend you just cut every single one you can get near. And then just kind of pull the threads away until you can pull this edge and things come apart. There we go. And you want to be relatively gentle while you're seam ripping because you can distort your fabric a lot if you pull too hard. Now, let me show you the first technique. I admit it's the slowest, but it's also the most careful. If there is something that you cannot risk putting a hole in it, absolutely no way on earth can there be a hole in this because you can't fix it, or you're so far done with the project and you just have to take out 3 stitches to fix it, this is the way I would do it. This is the safest way. The safest way is to cut every 3 to 5 to 7 stitches. And I'm just going to slide along here and do a very small amount. So I'm cutting every couple stitches, and then in each of those segments you kind of grab into the center and you pull. I'm just going to pull out each of these a little bit at a time. So you pull, and a couple more of the stitches come out when you pull, and you just go and release every single one of these. Now at this point, they're still kind of caught in there. You can use the little rubby if you want to see if some of them will come loose, but they're still stuck. So you're going to go in here, and you're going to release every single little one, and then pull out the little bits. Oop, you see, I just pulled that black right through. That happens sometimes. So after you would do this segment, you turn it over, and your black thread would have been laying right here, and then you just pull it up and you cut it off, and now that section is open, able to be used, and you barely disturbed the fabric at all. That is the safest way to do seam ripping. But it's not fast. Can you imagine doing a lot of seam ripping that way? You might as well turn the Netflix on and just start, because you're going to be there a while, which is fine. Sometimes this is the right way to do it. Let me show you some other ways. Here we have another example. The back stitching is over here on this one. So I am going to use the 1 stitch at a time method to get the back stitching released, because that really holds onto the fabric well. So now that I have the back stitching released, You pull through here, and you see how I'm pulling, and you see these ladders, basically. Let me show you at this angle. It's laddering. I'm going to switch hands because I am definitely a righty. You can use these ladders to make things go quicker. You can pull a little bit, and where it kind of starts to feel some pressure, you cut the ladders. So you pull down a little bit more, and you cut the ladders. And you keep working your way down like this. Now this method is a surefire way to get lots of little threads. So again, that's where this thing comes in pretty darn well. Turn it over, you got lots of little threads here. Pick those out. Some people like using tweezers. I just like using my fingers. And there you go. That one's all done up to here. Still way quicker. But you don't always have a seam that you can pull apart. Sometimes you're working in the garment in a spot where you definitely can't pull it apart like this. I am now going to tell you what that little red ball is for. This method of seam ripping involves sliding the seam ripper in between the two pieces of fabric. And that little red ball is actually what holds the layers of fabric apart. So let's go down here. Let's get it started. Okay, so we've pulled out that end. Now we see the stitches. Now what I'm going to do is open up the top here, and I'm going to lay my seam ripper in between these layers here. So let me give you a better angle of this. So the ball is going to be inside those layers, and the pointer is going to be outside those layers. So the ball is holding the layers of your fabric away from that cutting edge. And what you are doing is you are putting light pressure. Light pressure. If you ever feel like you're pushing hard, stop. That either means your seam ripper is dull, or it means you're not aligned right. You just lay that in there, and you just push lightly, and it will slowly cut through the stitches. You can kind of use all of these techniques together, but sometimes you just can't get into where you want to be without just laying it in between and slowly either pushing the fabric along or pushing the seam ripper along. Here, I'm going to do it one more time. Lay it in. This time I'm going to push the seam ripper. Okay. There we go. The whole thing. That is the quickest you can do seam ripping, but you can't do it without a sharp seam ripper. No matter what style of seam ripper you like, make sure it's sharp. Thank you for watching another Fabric Ninja tutorial. I look forward to seeing what you make and what you unmake.